Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the IOM for partnering with PCORI. You are a very nice looking group of people. It's right size, you got intrigued looks on your faces, and in my job at PCORI, about 2 to 3 times every single week, an event comes up that I've been looking forward to for about a year, and it happened last Friday and Saturday, it happened again on Tuesday, and here it is happening again on Thursday. PCORI is delighted to be here and be co-sponsoring this. There is a self-serving quality to this meeting, which I'll get into in a minute. But first, I want to add my thanks to all of you for being here, to those of you who are watching on the webcast just as much, and to the planning committee. This planning committee met probably more frequently than many planning committees do. There, as you can imagine, there were many ways we could have taken this on, many directions we could go. Many directions were in the heads of planning committee members at the beginning, but I think we settled on an agenda that is really practical, that is going to serve PCORI and the research community very well. I clearly want to thank members of the methodology committee who are participating today, the PCORI's methodology committee, and a number of them who served on the planning committee, including Steve Goodman, David Meltzer, who's here, Sally Morton, who I believe is here. I haven't seen Sally. There's Sally. Gene Slutsky, Mike Lauer, Sebastian Schneeweiss, and Robin Newhouse. I hope I didn't miss any methodology committee members, but thank them. Also happy to say that there are at least 2 PCORI Board of Governors here, Larry Barnett and Gail Hunt, and I'm not, if I missed any Board of Governors, I apologize. And a number of PCORI staff are in the audience. So this topic of the optimal use of observational studies complementarily with randomized trials is very central to PCORI's mission and to the work that we hope to accomplish. We're charged with conducting comparative clinical effectiveness research to guide decision making. If we're going to put out evidence that we say should guide decision making, it's got to be internally valid, it's got to be rigorous, but it also has to apply to the people we're talking to. It also has to be generalizable. One of the notions of comparative clinical effectiveness is, in fact, that it's drawn from research, drawn from clinical care in typical clinical settings and in a broad range of patients, like the patients making those decisions. So that sort of sets up the tension between randomized trials on the one hand and observational studies in real-world settings on the other. When I got to PCORI, I found that there was, people were rather divided. I ran into a number of people who really felt that the essence of PCORI and the legislation was to finally take advantage of that clinical data out there in large integrated delivery systems and figure out what works for whom solely by doing observational studies. There was another very vocal group that said the only way you can do good comparative clinical effectiveness research is through randomized trials. So this question has been in my forebrain for nearly 2 years now. Last November here at the IOM, a meeting was hosted. We didn't sponsor, but we had attended it in numbers on large, simple trials. So there, the problem was, the approach was, let's stick with randomization, but let's move it to real-world settings. Let's use simple protocols, and let's involve typical patients so that it generalizes, so that it can be done, so that it can be large and look at patient subgroups. And that was a very interesting study, but a very interesting workshop, but it certainly called for its complement, and that's what we're doing here today. What's left for observational studies? How do we weave them in with randomized trial evidence to support decision making? We start by, the meeting will start by simply asking the question, how do we make observational studies more rigorous, more internally valid? How do we address the issue of bias? And then we move on to the question of if we have clinical trial evidence, and if the studies have been conducted in patient populations that are not entirely representative of all the patients we see, all the patients to whom a treatment might apply, how can we use observational studies to generalize the findings, to extend the findings from those randomized trials to broader populations. So that's part two. Another part of comparative clinical effectiveness that I ran into as quickly as I got here, aware of it before, but certainly it was on the minds of just about everybody here in DC when I arrived. An intriguing part is the notion that with respect to treatments, one size does not fit all. The so-called tyranny of the average that some had seen as the hallmark of evidence-based medicine has been called into question. It's called into question in the legislation that created PCORI. We are called on to look at treatment heterogeneity. So this notion of using data to learn about what treatments may work better for one subpopulation or another is an intriguing notion. And the question here today is, to what extent can observational data apply to and support that line of inquiry to look for treatment heterogeneity. And the final topic I think of as in some ways an extension of this notion of treatment heterogeneity down to the level of the individual patient. So some have called this personalized medicine. The question here today is whether observational studies have a role in helping us develop individualized predictions, not of risk for an outcome, but individualized predictions of response to treatment. So observational studies have obviously proven very useful for predicting risk. And in the 21st century, at this point, with an emphasis on and a heightened emphasis on the individual and individualized recommendations and decisions, what can observational studies bring to this question of predicting treatment response? So in closing, I just want to say that my exciting event from 2 days ago was the launch of a very large PCORI-funded initiative on building a national research infrastructure. This was not an idea that was born with PCORI. The IOM has had an awful lot to do with building the notion of a learning healthcare system. People in this audience have spent years building data networks from real-world data from integrated delivery systems, and PCORI is putting some substantial resources into advancing the thinking and the reality of research, clinical research, data networks, but in this case, governed in part by patients, clinicians, and the healthcare systems that produce the data. So we've put that onto the table, and we said very clearly that we think this infrastructure needs to support, yes, observational studies drawn from clinical data, but just as much must support, and this is really a hallmark of the announcement, must support randomized trials in real-world settings. So that announcement is out, and it seems a good backdrop for a discussion today of the appropriate roles, the optimal roles for the two approaches. So with that, I'll just say once again, thanks for being here, and I will turn it over to my co-chair, Dr. Horwitz.